I am look forward to sharing the results of research that we have just completed for the CTA with representative cross sections of registered voters across California and parents who also are registered voters. We were in the field with this research between March 9th and March 16th. So this is hot off the press. We interviewed a representative cross section of 1,839 registered voters across the state. We have a separate sample of 661 public school parents, and some of those include additional oversample interviews we did. The research was conducted both by phone and online. We used the phone interviews to make sure that we were having a appropriately inclusive sample. So the phone interviews were conducted in the zip codes that represented the communities, the 25% of the state with the lowest income who may not have the same capacity to participate in an online survey. And we're confident that the results we're sharing today are representative of what you would hear if you talk to the registered voters and parents broadly. This is very important research because it presents a different view than I think is being seen in the media. Certainly a more nuanced, a more nuanced view than you often hear, and that's particularly true with communities of color who have had more severe experiences with the coronavirus pandemic. Just in general, though, we'll start off with a bit of good news, which is voters, compared to the last time we did a comparable survey for the CTA, voters and parents both in California are feeling more upbeat about the overall direction of the state. 54% of voters now say California is going in the right direction. That represents a majority, whereas in our previous poll, only 38% said the state was going in the right direction. And we see an even more dramatic change among parents about a feeling that things are going in the right direction. That's partly a reflection of a decline in the sense that the coronavirus is starting to be under control. When we did our previous survey back in September, by a 26-point margin, voters in the state and parents in the state said that coronavirus was still a serious problem where they lived, rather than being pretty well under control. Still, in both populations, we have majorities saying that coronavirus is still a serious problem, but smaller majorities than we measured previously. And some of those who say it's still a serious problem think it will be under control in the next foreseeable period of time. One of the things that is important to note here is that among parents we interviewed, we asked them whether they were satisfied or dissatisfied with their children's education in the current school year. And while I think you hear a lot of unhappy parents in the news, that's not the picture that we're getting in our representative sampling of parents, whereby 65 to 34 parents say that they are more satisfied than dissatisfied with their child's education so far this school year. That's true across various ethnicities. It's lower among AAPI parents, but across grade levels, and you see fairly substantial majorities saying that they are satisfied for the most part with their child's education so far this year. In addition to that, we also find that both voters and even more so parents approve of the way local school districts have handled decisions about whether, when, and how schools should reopen for in-person instruction. So among voters, you can see by 62 to 34, they are expressing approval of the decisions that schools have made. Among parents, by 70 to 29, they are expressing approval of the decisions that schools have made. White non-Hispanic parents are more likely than others to express approval, but it's very clear majorities across races and ethnicities in terms of approval. So we're while I think you hear the kind of the negative parents more frequently in the news, in reality, they are the exception and not the rule. And one thing that hasn't changed is that the preeminent priority among both voters and parents when it comes to the question of whether, when, and how to reopen schools for in-person instruction is to keep students, staff, and families as safe as possible, rather than getting students back into classrooms as soon as possible. And this is by a very decisive margin among all voters statewide, by 72 to 27. They should say the preeminent priority needs to be keeping students, staff, and families as safe as possible. A very similar result among parents at 75%, saying that should be the priority. So that parents may want to get their children back into classrooms, but in terms of weighing one thing against another, they are much more focused on making sure that students, staff, and families are as safe as possible. I noted earlier that most parents and voters approve of the district's decisions their local school districts have been making about reopening schools for in-person instruction. We asked both groups here whether schools in their local schools are opening at the right pace, or reopening too quickly, or are reopening too slowly. And here, among voters, the plurality position among both groups is that schools are opening at the right pace. There are voters who think that something is off here, but they are among voters pretty evenly split between saying that schools are reopening too quickly rather than opening too slowly. And among parents, it's just 23% who say that their schools are opening too slowly, so that is not a dominant view at all. And a larger group, a third of parents, say that their local public schools are opening too quickly. Here, and this is a theme that we'll see played out throughout the remaining results, is that there are substantial differences by race and ethnicity. So you can see parents of color, whether they are Hispanic, Asian, or Black, are very often say that their schools are opening too quickly, not too slowly, whereas white non-Hispanic parents, by a very small margin, are more likely to say that they are opening too slowly rather than too quickly. But among white parents, it is still a minority of 31% who say that schools are opening too slowly. This is good news that there's increasing confidence among parents that the schools right now are safe for in-person instruction. So when we asked parents this question back in September, only 35% said that they were very or fairly confident that their local public schools were safe right now for in-person instruction, and that has risen to 47%. And there's been a decline from 42% to 28% in the percentage of parents who say that they are not at all confident, not that confident, or not confident at all. So we are seeing a change here. I would note that it's still less than a majority of parents who are confident that their local public schools can reopen safely at this moment, but it's certainly moving in that direction. And one thing we asked, we don't have a slide for it, but we also asked our respondents, well, how about a month from now? And that adding a month does not add much more confidence. You can see among parents that dads are a little bit more confident than moms are, that schools are safe right now. Republican voters are more confident than other voters are, other parents are. And again, you see this very dramatic difference by racial and ethnic lines, where 62% of white parents say, I feel confident that my local schools are safe right now. Whereas far fewer parents of color, again, whether they're Hispanic, AAPI, or Black, are willing to express that kind of confidence in the safety of their local public schools at this moment. And you can see in LA County, there is less confidence as well in terms of that schools are safe right now. We asked a kind of a related question, which is, would you be comfortable sending your child to school for in-person instruction at this time? And again, we're seeing an improving situation, whereas the percentage of parents who said they would feel comfortable has risen from 38% to 58%. So that's significant. But again, you see this very dramatic difference by race and ethnicity. 3/4 of white parents say that they would definitely or probably feel comfortable sending their children to school right now for in-person instruction, but it drops by a substantial degree among parents of color. And there are some differences by area of the state. In San Diego and Orange County, and in the kind of smaller media markets, voters tend to be a little bit more, parents tend to be a little bit more confident. Those tend to be more Republican areas, and there's definitely a political dimension to this. With all of that improvement in parents saying that they feel confident in and comfortable about sending their kids back to school, it is very important to note that when we ask what's worrying parents more right now about their child's schooling, that their child might fall behind academically if they're only offered remote learning and no in-person instruction, or that their child might get infected at school or bring the virus home with him or her. And you can see, even in this context of growing confidence, parents are more concerned about the possibility that their child will get infected or bring the infection home than they are about their child falling behind academically. White parents are evenly divided on that question, but parents of color, by very large margins, tend to be more concerned. And again, parents of color tend to live in communities that have been more severely affected by the virus. Parents of color are far more likely to be concerned that their child might get infected at school or bring the virus home with them. And in I think a kind of a very important finding, we told people when schools reopen, you'll still have the option of having your child participate in remote learning from home or attending classes in person at school. And parents are evenly divided about what they're going to do in that circumstance. Only 48% said, if that's my choice, I'm going to send my child to school. And 51% said, I'm more inclined to participate in remote learning from home. There are a couple of things at play here. There's these safety concerns are significant, but we've also heard in qualitative research that parents have logistical concerns about about getting their children back and forth from school. Again, we're seeing the same very substantial difference between white parents and parents of color in these results. And we can also, even among white parents, who many of whom say that that they're confident, 40% of them say they're inclined to keep their kids at home for remote learning. And for high school parents are more inclined to keep their kids at home. We asked voters about what they think should happen with schools at the elementary level in their district, elementary level, middle schools, and at the high school level, whether they should be fully should they be fully open for in-person instruction, open on a hybrid or mixed model of some in-person learning and some remote learning, or remote learning only. One thing that is notable here is that it doesn't really matter what kind of school that we're talking about. It is a relatively small minority who think that that schools at any level should be fully open for in-person instruction and that and only offering in-person instruction. The center of gravity is more with a hybrid approach, but there are more voters at each level of school say that schools should be remote only than say that they should be in-person only. We also are able to look at this question by the kind of schools their own children among parents, based on the kind of schools their own children attend. So you can see among elementary school parents, they are generally supportive of hybrid education and some in-person instruction. Only 29% of elementary school parents say their school should operate on a remote teaching only basis. But at the middle school level and the high school level, we do have substantial minorities of parents who say, I want my kid's school should only be open on a remote basis. So 40% of middle school parents say my middle school should be operating on a remote only basis. 40% of high school parents say high school should be operating on a remote only basis. There is a kind of recognition, and we've seen this in our previous polling, that schools should only be allowed to reopen if they've made major changes to prevent the spread of coronavirus. So reopening is not going back to the way things were, but parents are expecting and really demanding a new normal in terms of safety and safety precautions in schools. And that's true across race and ethnicity among parents. And there's some recognition that schools need more resources in order to provide the level of safety that's necessary. There's agreement among both voters and parents that schools should only be open for in-person instruction after teachers have had a chance to get vaccinated. 71% of voters and 63% of parents feel that way. One of the things that where there's probably the greatest disparity between what voters and parents believe and the public policy conversation that's going on is that there's a broad consensus that schools that are in the purple zone in terms of their transmission rates should not be open. And that's kind of the debate we're having, is what should happen in the purple zone. But in the red zone, where there's apparently no longer kind of much of a conversation, majorities of both parents and voters say if they're in red zones, they should not be open. So here, the conversation that's going on is a little bit different from where the public's at. Then when you get into orange and yellow zone, both parents and majorities of parents and voters say in those circumstances, schools can be open for in-person instruction. In terms of who voters trust about whether, how, and when schools should open, the politicians, the state politicians are kind of down at the bottom. When we had asked previously about President Trump, he was at a much lower position than President Biden is now, but still public health experts are highly respected, as are teachers. People really rely and respect on the views of teachers on the question of whether, how, and when schools should reopen. In our previous poll, we're actually measuring, not everybody recognizes the name of the California Teachers Association, but we have measured among parents and actually an increasing respect and reliance for what the California Teachers Association has to say. So as this conversation has progressed, the appreciation for the position of the California Teachers Association has increased, not decreased. We're not measuring any kind of anti-union backlash in any shape, form, or fashion. And in fact, and I'll end here. Thank you for your patience. We asked what voters and parents, what their perception is of teachers, that they're willing to reopen schools as long as the appropriate safety precautions are in place, or they're not willing to reopen schools and have insisted on unnecessary safety precautions, or they don't know enough to say. There are, a third of parents and close to a quarter of a third of voters and close to a quarter of parents say, I don't really know. But to the extent that voters or parents have an assessment of what teachers are doing, overwhelmingly, they say teachers have been willing to reopen schools as long as the appropriate safety precautions are in place. If you just base the percentages on those with an opinion, it would be 71% of all voters put teachers in that category, willing to reopen as long as the appropriate safety precautions are in place, and 76% of parents who express an opinion come down on that side, rather than saying that teachers have been unwilling to reopen schools and have been insisting on unnecessary precautions.